Marcus wiped down the last table at Danny's diner, his shoulders aching from the double shift. The clock on the wall showed 11:30 p.m., and he still had to pick up his 7-year-old daughter Emma from his neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez. Being a single dad wasn't easy, especially when you're working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. His phone buzzed with a notification from the dating app his friend Jake had forced him to download 3 months ago. Marcus had been reluctant at first. Who had time for dating when you're juggling restaurant shifts and trying to be a good father? But Jake insisted that Emma needed to see her dad happy, and maybe, just maybe, there was someone out there who would understand their situation. The message was from someone named Sarah. Her profile picture showed a woman with kind eyes and a genuine smile. Nothing flashy or overdone. She worked in business management, according to her bio, enjoyed reading, and loved spending time outdoors. What caught Marcus's attention wasn't her looks, though she was certainly attractive, but rather her message itself. "Hi, Marcus. I saw that you mentioned being a single dad in your profile. I really admire parents who work so hard for their children. I'd love to get to know you better if you're interested. No pressure at all. I know how busy life can be." It was refreshing. Most messages he received either ignored the fact that he had a daughter or seemed put off by it. Sarah seemed different. Over the next 2 weeks, they exchanged messages daily. She asked about Emma, wanted to know about his work, and shared stories about her own busy schedule. She mentioned working long hours and traveling frequently for business, but always made time to respond to his messages. What Marcus didn't know was that Sarah's business management job was actually running a multi-billion-dollar tech company. Sarah Chen had built her empire from nothing, starting with a small software company in her garage 12 years ago. Now, at 32, she was the CEO of Chen Technologies, a company that employed over 50,000 people worldwide. Her net worth was estimated at $3.2 billion, though she tried not to think about such numbers. Sarah had grown tired of dating men who were only interested in her wealth. Every relationship felt transactional. Every gesture seemed motivated by money rather than genuine affection. She had started using dating apps under a carefully crafted persona, successful enough to be independent, but modest enough to attract real connections. She drove her oldest car, a reliable Honda Civic she'd kept from her struggling days, and dressed down when meeting potential dates. When Marcus finally asked if she'd like to meet for coffee, Sarah's heart actually skipped. There was something authentic about him that she hadn't encountered in years. His messages were filled with genuine concern for others, stories about making Emma laugh, and honest admissions about the challenges of single parenthood. He never once asked about her financial situation or made assumptions about what she could afford. They agreed to meet at Corner Cafe, a small local spot that Marcus suggested because it was close to his apartment, and the coffee was good even though it wasn't fancy. Sarah almost laughed when she realized she'd never been to such a modest place for a date in years. Her recent suitors had insisted on expensive restaurants, exclusive clubs, or VIP experiences that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The night before their date, Marcus stood in front of his small closet trying to decide what to wear. His nicest shirt had a small stain that he'd been meaning to get professionally cleaned, but money was tight. He settled on a simple button-down that Emma had helped him iron, though her 6-year-old hands had created more wrinkles than they'd removed. He'd managed to save $40 for the date, money that had taken him 2 weeks to set aside from his tips. Sarah, meanwhile, was having her own wardrobe crisis. Her usual casual clothes still screamed expensive. Her simple jeans cost more than Marcus probably made in a week. She finally found an old pair of jeans and a basic sweater from her college days, clothes she'd kept for sentimental reasons. Looking in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. When was the last time she'd appeared in public without designer labels? The morning of their date, Marcus dropped Emma off at school and headed to his day job at the hardware store. He'd specifically requested to leave early, something his understanding boss, Mr. Peterson, allowed since Marcus never asked for favors. Throughout the day, Marcus found himself nervous in a way he hadn't been since high school. What if Sarah didn't like him? What if she realized he wasn't good enough for her? Sarah spent her morning in back-to-back board meetings, approving budgets that represented more money than most people would see in a lifetime. During lunch, her assistant reminded her about the charity gala next week, where she was expected to donate at least $1 million. The contrast wasn't lost on her. In a few hours, she'd be sitting in a coffee shop, pretending to be someone completely different. As afternoon approached, both Marcus and Sarah found themselves checking the clock more frequently. Marcus finished his shift at the hardware store and went home to shower and change. Emma was at after-school care, and he'd arranged for Mrs. Rodriguez to pick her up if he ran late. He looked at himself one more time in the bathroom mirror, hoping he looked presentable. Sarah left her downtown office early, something that surprised her staff since she rarely left before 8 p.m. She drove her Honda Civic to a parking garage several blocks away from the cafe, not wanting to arrive in her usual chauffeured luxury car. As she walked those few blocks, she realized how long it had been since she'd simply walked somewhere without security or fanfare. Both of them arrived at Corner Cafe 5 minutes early, each sitting in their cars for a moment, gathering courage. Marcus checked his wallet one more time. $40, enough for coffee and maybe a pastry for each of them. Sarah checked her small purse, which contained only $20 in cash, her driver's license, and one credit card, a basic card with a low limit that she'd kept from her early days. Neither had any idea that their lives were about to change forever, or that this simple coffee date would challenge everything they thought they knew about love, money, and what really matters in life. Marcus saw her first as she walked through the door of Corner Cafe. Sarah looked exactly like her photos, but somehow more beautiful in person. She wore simple jeans and a soft gray sweater, and when she smiled at him, he felt his nervousness transform into excitement. He stood up from the small table he'd chosen near the window and waved. "Marcus?" Sarah approached with a genuine warmth that immediately put him at ease. "It's so nice to finally meet you." They hugged briefly, and Marcus caught a hint of expensive perfume, though he didn't recognize it as something that cost more than his monthly grocery budget. Sarah had forgotten she was wearing her usual fragrance, a small detail that didn't match her carefully constructed, modest persona. "You look great," Marcus said, pulling out her chair. His mother had raised him to be a gentleman regardless of circumstances. "I hope you don't mind this place. It's not fancy, but the coffee is really good." Sarah smiled, touched by the gesture. When was the last time someone had pulled out her chair without being paid to do so? "It's perfect. I love cozy places like this." She genuinely meant it. The cafe had mismatched chairs, local artwork on the walls, and the kind of atmosphere that felt like home. It was such a contrast to the sterile luxury of the restaurants she usually frequented, where everything was perfectly coordinated and soullessly expensive. They approached the counter together, and Marcus studied the menu board nervously. Coffee was $3.50, which was reasonable, but the pastries ranged from $4 to $8 each. He quickly calculated in his head, if they each got coffee and shared a pastry, he'd be fine. "What looks good to you?" Marcus asked. Sarah glanced at the prices and realized with horror that she'd only brought $20. In her world, $20 wouldn't even cover a tip at most places she dined. She'd grown so accustomed to never thinking about money that she'd forgotten how real people had to budget. "Just coffee for me," she said quickly. "I'm trying to cut back on sweets." Marcus noticed her looking at a particularly delicious-looking chocolate croissant with longing. "Are you sure? We could share something if you want." "My treat." Sarah felt a strange flutter in her chest. When was the last time someone had offered to treat her to something that cost $5? Her usual dates competed to spend thousands impressing her. But somehow Marcus's offer of half a pastry felt more meaningful than any expensive gesture she'd received. "That's really sweet. But I'm fine with just coffee," she insisted, not wanting him to spend money he might not have. They ordered 2 coffees and found their way back to the table. Marcus pulled out a $20 bill and watched the cashier count back his change carefully. $16.50 left, enough for a nice tip and maybe ice cream for Emma later. What Marcus didn't see was Sarah quietly panicking as she reached for her wallet. She pulled out her $20 bill and realized with growing horror that it wasn't $20 at all. In the dim light of her purse, she'd grabbed what she thought was a 20, but it was actually a $5 bill left over from some long-forgotten cash transaction. Her coffee cost $3.50. She had exactly $1.50 left. Sarah Chen, Billionaire CEO, was sitting in a coffee shop with $1.50 to her name. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so mortifying. "I'll get this," Marcus said, reaching for both cups. "No, absolutely not," Sarah said quickly, handing over her $5 bill. "Separate checks, please." The teenage cashier took her money and counted back $1.50 in change. Sarah tried to act casual as she pocketed the coins, but inside she was dying of embarrassment. She'd built a business empire, had millions of people's livelihoods depending on her decisions, and she couldn't even buy herself a cup of coffee properly. Marcus noticed her slight discomfort but misread it. He assumed she was being independent because she didn't want to feel indebted to him. He found it refreshing. So many people expected others to pay their way. They settled into conversation easily. Sarah asked about Emma, and Marcus's face lit up as he pulled out his phone to show pictures. His daughter was beautiful, with his dark eyes and a gap-toothed grin that melted Sarah's heart. She lost her front tooth last week, Marcus explained proudly. The tooth fairy brought her $2, which she's been carrying around in her pocket ever since, planning what to buy. Sarah laughed, thinking about how Emma's tooth fairy money was more than she currently had in her wallet. What does she want to buy? A book about dolphins. She's obsessed with marine life right now. Keeps asking me to take her to the aquarium, but tickets are pretty expensive. Marcus caught himself, realizing he might be oversharing about his financial situation. Sarah's heart ached. She could buy Emma 1,000 books about dolphins without thinking twice. Could probably buy the entire aquarium if she wanted to. But sitting here as plain Sarah, she couldn't even offer to help with coffee. That's wonderful that she loves reading, Sarah said. Smart kids always do. Marcus beamed with pride. She gets that from her mom. Emma was always the bookworm in the family. Was? Sarah asked gently. Marcus's expression grew serious. Emma's mom died in a car accident 3 years ago. It's just been me and my daughter since then. Sarah felt her chest tighten with sympathy. She'd grown up with both parents, had never faced the kind of loss and responsibility Marcus carried every day. I'm so sorry, Marcus. You're doing an amazing job raising her. Some days I wonder, Marcus admitted. I work a lot just to keep up with everything. Sometimes I worry she needs more than I can give her. She needs love, Sarah said softly. Everything else is just details. They talked for 2 hours. Sarah found herself sharing stories she'd never told anyone, carefully edited to fit her cover story. She talked about growing up in a small apartment, about her parents' struggles to make ends meet, about working multiple jobs through college. All of it was true. It was just from 15 years ago, before her life had changed completely. Marcus shared his own struggles with surprising openness. He talked about the guilt he felt working so much, about Emma's questions about why other kids had moms and she didn't, about his fears that he wasn't enough for her. You are enough, Sarah said with conviction. Any child would be lucky to have a father who cares as much as you do. As the evening wound down, Marcus walked Sarah to her car, which she'd parked several blocks away. They talked the entire walk, both reluctant to end the evening. I had a really wonderful time, Sarah said, and she meant it more than any polite closing she'd ever offered. Me too, Marcus replied. Would you like to do this again? Maybe dinner next time? Sarah's heart sank. Dinner would be more expensive, and she'd already shown up to a coffee date with $5. How could she navigate an actual restaurant? But looking into Marcus's hopeful eyes, she couldn't bear to say no. I'd love that, she said. They hugged goodbye, and Sarah watched Marcus walk back toward the cafe where he'd parked his old pickup truck. She sat in her Honda Civic for a few minutes, trying to process what had just happened. For the first time in years, she'd connected with someone who saw her as just Sarah. Not Sarah Chen, the CEO, not Sarah Chen, the billionaire, just Sarah. But now she had a problem. How was she supposed to continue this charade when she could barely afford coffee, let alone dinner? And more importantly, how long could she keep lying to someone who was being so genuinely honest with her? The next morning, Sarah sat in her executive office on the 42nd floor of the Chen Technologies building, staring out at the city's skyline. Her assistant had just briefed her on the day's schedule: a board meeting at 10, lunch with potential investors from Japan, and a conference call with the London office. It was the kind of day that usually energized her, but today she felt distracted. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Thank you for such a wonderful evening. Emma wants to know if you like pizza because she thinks we should invite you over for dinner sometime. Sarah smiled despite her complicated feelings. The idea of having pizza with Marcus and his daughter sounded more appealing than the $1,000 per person business dinner she was supposed to attend that evening. She typed back, I love pizza. Emma sounds like she has excellent ideas. What she didn't type was how the simple invitation had touched her more than any elaborate gesture from her usual social circle. When was the last time someone had invited her over just to share a meal, without any business agenda or expectation of what she might do for them in return? Meanwhile, Marcus was having his own morning challenges. He'd arrived at Danny's diner for the breakfast shift to find that the coffee machine had broken down overnight. Without coffee, they'd lose half their morning customers, and Marcus needed every tip he could get. He'd already started planning how to ask Sarah out properly, maybe to that Italian place downtown where he could use the employee discount from when he'd helped them fix their freezer last month. "You're glowing," observed Rita, the 60-year-old waitress who'd been working at Danny's since before Marcus was born. "Got yourself a date last night?" Marcus couldn't help but grin as he mopped the floor. "Maybe. She's different, Rita, really different." "Different how? She got all her teeth? No crazy ex-husbands?" Marcus laughed. "Different like, she actually listened when I talked about Emma, asked real questions, and she didn't seem bothered that I'm a single dad working restaurant jobs." Rita raised an eyebrow. "Honey, any woman who's bothered by you working honest jobs isn't worth your time anyway. What's she do for work? Some kind of business management. She seems really smart. Talks about working long hours and traveling for work. I think she might be more successful than me. But she doesn't make me feel bad about it." What Marcus didn't know was that Sarah was, at that very moment, approving a quarterly budget that included a $50 million expansion into the Asian market. She signed documents with a pen that cost more than his monthly rent. While he scrubbed floors and worried about buying coffee, Sarah spent her lunch break doing something she hadn't done in years. She went to a regular department store and bought normal clothes. Standing in Target, surrounded by families doing their weekly shopping, she felt like an anthropologist studying an alien culture. She picked out simple jeans, basic sweaters, and a few casual dresses that cost less than what she usually spent on lunch. The cashier, a young woman about Emma's age, smiled as she rang up Sarah's purchases. "Having a wardrobe refresh?" "Something like that," Sarah replied, handing over cash. It felt strange, this normal interaction with someone who had no idea who she was. No special treatment, no recognition, just a simple transaction between two people. That evening, Marcus picked up Emma from after-school care and they went grocery shopping together. Emma insisted on pushing the cart, which meant a lot of zigzagging through the aisles, but Marcus didn't mind. These were the moments he treasured even when they were doing mundane tasks like buying milk and bread. "Daddy, tell me about Sarah again," Emma said as they waited in line to check out. "What do you want to know, sweetheart? Is she pretty? Is she nice? Will she like me?" Marcus knelt down to Emma's level. "She's very pretty and she seems very nice. And how could anyone not like you? You're the best kid in the whole world." Emma giggled. "You have to say that because you're my daddy." "Nope, I say it because it's true." What Marcus didn't see was Sarah, 3 aisles over, watching this interaction with tears in her eyes. She'd come to the same grocery store on impulse, wanting to experience normal life, and had accidentally encountered them. Seeing Marcus with his daughter, the obvious love between them, the way he got down on her level to talk to her seriously, it made her chest tight with emotion. She'd never thought much about having children. Her life was too busy, too demanding, too focused on the next deal or expansion. But watching Emma laugh at something her father said, seeing the pure joy in both their faces, Sarah wondered what she might be missing. She quickly paid for her own groceries, normal things like eggs and bread instead of the gourmet meals her private chef usually prepared, and left before they could see her. It felt too much like spying, even though they were in a public place. The next few days passed in a strange parallel existence. Sarah would spend her days making decisions that affected thousands of jobs and millions of dollars, then go home to her penthouse and practice being normal. She studied how regular people talked, what they worried about, how they spent their free time. It was like preparing for the role of a lifetime. Marcus, meanwhile, found himself working extra hard to save money for their next date. He picked up an additional shift at the hardware store and stayed late at Danny's to earn overtime. Emma noticed her father was extra tired but also extra happy, singing while he made her breakfast and smiling at random moments. "Are you going to marry Sarah?" Emma asked one morning as Marcus braided her hair for school. The question caught him completely off guard. "Sweetheart, I've only met her once. People don't get married after one coffee date. But you like her a lot, right? I can tell because you smile different now. Out of the mouths of babes. Marcus did feel different. For the first time since his wife died, he felt like maybe there was room in their life for someone else. Maybe Emma could have a mother figure and maybe he could have a partner to share the load with. I do like her, he admitted. But these things take time, okay? We need to get to know each other better first. Sarah was having similar conversations, albeit with herself. She'd canceled 3 business dinners that week, claiming she wasn't feeling well just so she could go home and think about Marcus. Her staff was starting to worry about her. Sarah Chen never got sick, never canceled meetings, never seemed to need rest. Perhaps you should see a doctor, suggested her assistant, Margaret, who'd been with her for 8 years. You've been different this week. Different how? Distracted, almost happy? It's unusual. Sarah almost laughed. Happy was exactly what she was, and it was terrifying. She'd built her entire adult life around control, around knowing exactly where she stood with everyone and everything. But with Marcus, she was flying blind, and somehow that felt wonderful and horrible at the same time. Friday evening, Marcus finally called to ask her to dinner. His voice was slightly nervous as he suggested a small Italian restaurant downtown. Nothing fancy, he said quickly. Just good food and a chance to talk more. Sarah's heart raced. That sounds perfect. What neither of them knew was that the restaurant Marcus had chosen was directly across the street from the Chen Technologies building. Sarah would be eating dinner looking up at her own office windows, pretending to be someone she wasn't, while Marcus saved for weeks to afford a meal she could buy without thinking. As they hung up, both felt the same mixture of excitement and anxiety. Marcus worried about whether he was good enough for her. Sarah worried about whether she could keep up the deception long enough to figure out if what she was feeling was real. Neither of them realized that their biggest challenge wasn't their different financial situations. It was the growing web of small lies that was becoming harder to maintain with every genuine moment they shared. The Italian restaurant, Mama Lucia's, was exactly the kind of place Marcus had hoped it would be. Warm, welcoming, and affordable. The walls were covered with family photos and vintage Italian posters, and the smell of garlic and fresh bread filled the air. Marcus had called ahead to make sure they could accommodate his employee discount, and he'd even managed to save enough for a decent tip. Sarah arrived 10 minutes early, wearing one of her new Target outfits, dark jeans and a simple blue sweater that brought out her eyes. She sat in her Honda Civic for a moment, taking deep breaths and reminding herself to be Sarah the business manager, not Sarah the CEO. She'd practiced ordering modestly, sharing dishes, and acting like someone who had to consider prices. What she hadn't practiced was the emotional impact of seeing Marcus walk through the restaurant door, his face lighting up when he spotted her. He'd clearly made an effort. His hair was perfectly styled and he wore a button-down shirt that looked freshly pressed. The sight of him made her heart do something complicated and wonderful. You look beautiful, Marcus said as he approached the table, and Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. When was the last time a compliment had affected her this way? Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself, she replied, and Marcus's smile could have powered the restaurant. They settled into their seats, and Marcus immediately felt more at ease than he had on their coffee date. This felt like a real date, the kind where you lingered over food and conversation. He'd been looking forward to this all week. The menu presented Sarah with an unexpected challenge. At Mama Lucia's, the most expensive entree was $18. In her normal life, she wouldn't even notice such prices, but as modest Sarah, she needed to act like $18 was a significant expense. She found herself genuinely studying the menu, calculating what she could order without seeming extravagant. The chicken parmesan looks good, Marcus said, though Sarah noticed his eyes lingering on the seafood pasta, which cost $4 more. What catches your eye? I was thinking about the spaghetti and meatballs, Sarah said, choosing one of the less expensive options. Classic comfort food, Marcus smiled. Good choice. Want to share the garlic bread? It's supposed to be amazing here. The gesture was small, but it touched Sarah deeply. He was trying to make the meal special while being mindful of cost, probably planning to split things to make it more affordable. She'd never had someone consider her financial feelings before. Usually, her dates competed to order the most expensive items to impress her. As they waited for their food, they fell into easy conversation. Marcus asked about her work, and Sarah found herself treading carefully through half-truths and omissions. "Business management keeps me pretty busy," she said. "Lots of meetings, some travel. It can be demanding, but I love the challenge of it." It wasn't entirely a lie. She did love the challenge of running Chen Technologies, even if her version of demanding involved deciding the fate of entire market sectors rather than managing a small department. "What kind of business?" Marcus asked, genuinely interested. "Technology sector," Sarah replied, which was technically true. "We help other companies improve their systems and processes." Marcus nodded approvingly. "That sounds really important. Emma's always talking about technology and how everything's connected now. She's way smarter about computers than I am." Sarah's heart swelled at the mention of Emma. "She sounds incredibly bright. I'd love to meet her sometime." "She'd like that. She's been asking about you all week." Marcus paused, looking slightly embarrassed. "Actually, she's been planning what she wants to cook for you if you ever come over for dinner. Currently, the menu is mac and cheese with hot dogs cut up in it, and chocolate chip cookies for dessert." Sarah laughed, and it was genuine and delighted. "That sounds like the perfect meal. I can't remember the last time someone planned a special dinner just for me." It was true. Her usual dining experiences involved professional chefs, carefully planned business meals, or social obligations where the food was secondary to networking. The idea of a 7-year-old choosing hot dog mac and cheese especially for her was more touching than any 5-star restaurant experience. Their food arrived, and it was delicious in the way that only family-owned restaurants could manage. Sarah found herself actually enjoying the meal instead of picking at expensive food she barely tasted. Marcus was an engaging dinner companion, asking thoughtful questions and sharing funny stories about his customers at both jobs. "There's this regular at Danny's," Marcus said, cutting his chicken parmesan. "Old guy named Frank who comes in every Tuesday and Thursday. Orders the same thing every time. 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, and coffee. But he always asks to see the menu first, like maybe today's the day he's going to order something different." "Does he ever?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious about these small human stories that never touched her corporate world. "Never. But yesterday he asked me what I thought about the pancakes. I almost fell over. Rita, she's this waitress who's been there forever. She made a big show of marking the date on the calendar." Sarah found herself laughing harder than she had in months. These weren't the polished anecdotes and business war stories she usually heard at dinner. These were real slice-of-life moments, and they fascinated her. Midway through dinner, Marcus excused himself to use the restroom, and Sarah took the opportunity to really look around the restaurant. Through the window, she could see the Chen Technologies building looming across the street, her corner office visible on the 42nd floor. The contrast was surreal. She was sitting in a $20 per person restaurant pretending to be someone she wasn't, while her real life existed in that tower of steel and glass just yards away. Her phone buzzed with an urgent email from her CFO about a potential acquisition in Germany that needed her immediate attention. The deal was worth $2.8 billion. Sarah quickly typed back that she'd handle it first thing Monday morning, then put her phone away as Marcus returned to the table. "Everything okay?" he asked, noticing she looked slightly tense. "Just work stuff," she said dismissively. "Nothing that can't wait." Marcus nodded understandingly. "I know how that is. Sometimes the diner calls when we're short-staffed, but I try not to let work interrupt personal time." The difference in their work interruptions, his involving covering a shift, hers involving international acquisitions worth billions, made Sarah feel dizzy with the complexity of her deception. As dinner wound down, Marcus signaled for the check with visible nervousness. Sarah watched him carefully count out bills, adding what looked like a generous tip, despite the obvious cost to him. She wanted to pay, wanted to insist on covering the meal, but knew that would break character. "Thank you for such a lovely dinner," she said as they walked outside. "The food was incredible and the company was even better." Marcus beamed. "I'm really glad you enjoyed it. I was nervous about picking the right place." They walked slowly toward their cars, neither wanting the evening to end. The night air was crisp, and the city lights reflected off the windows of the buildings around them, including Sarah's own office building. "Would you like to go for a walk?" Marcus suggested. "There's a nice park just a few blocks from here." Sarah nodded eagerly, and they strolled through the small downtown park, talking about everything and nothing. Marcus told her more about Emma's school projects and his dreams of maybe opening his own restaurant someday. Sarah shared carefully edited stories about her childhood and her hopes for the future, surprised by how much of her real self she could reveal even while maintaining her cover. "I really like you, Sarah," Marcus said as they sat on a bench overlooking a small pond. "I know we haven't known each other long, but there's something about you that feels right." Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. She liked him too, more than she'd expected, more than was probably wise given the circumstances. But sitting there in the park, with this genuinely good man who worked 2 jobs to provide for his daughter, she felt more like herself than she had in years. "I like you too, Marcus," she said softly, "more than I probably should." He reached over and took her hand, and the simple gesture sent electricity through her entire body. When was the last time someone had held her hand just because they wanted to, with no agenda or expectation? As they finally said goodnight and headed to their respective cars, both felt the same mixture of joy and confusion. Marcus was falling for a woman he thought understood his world, while Sarah was falling for a man who had no idea who she really was. The truth was becoming harder to maintain with every genuine moment between them, but neither was ready to face what honesty might cost them. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself doing something she'd never done before, sitting on the floor of Marcus's small apartment, helping 7-year-old Emma build an elaborate castle out of cardboard boxes and construction paper. Emma had insisted that Sarah needed to see her room and meet her stuffed dolphin collection, and Sarah had been charmed into an impromptu craft session. "The princess needs a bigger tower," Emma declared, carefully cutting another piece of cardboard with child-safe scissors. "Daddy says princesses can live wherever they want, even in regular houses, but I think towers are more fun." Sarah smiled, watching Emma work with intense concentration. "Your daddy is absolutely right. Princesses come in all different types." Marcus appeared in the doorway with 3 glasses of lemonade, and the sight of Sarah sitting cross-legged on his daughter's bedroom floor, completely absorbed in their project, made his chest tight with emotion. She'd been spending more time with them over the past few weeks, and Emma had taken to her immediately. More importantly, Sarah seemed to genuinely enjoy Emma's company, asking about school projects and remembering details about Emma's friends and interests. "How's the construction going?" Marcus asked, settling down beside them. "Sarah's really good at this," Emma announced. "She knows how to make the windows look real, and she helped me figure out how to make the drawbridge work." What Emma didn't know was that Sarah had learned these skills from actually overseeing the construction of Chen Technologies' new headquarters, where she'd insisted on reviewing architectural plans and understanding every detail of the building process. But sitting here, using those same problem-solving skills to help a child build a cardboard castle, felt infinitely more satisfying than any corporate project. "I had a good teacher," Sarah said, smiling at Emma. "You're very creative." The 3 of them worked together for another hour, and Sarah found herself completely absorbed in the simple pleasure of the task. No board meetings, no quarterly reports, no decisions that affected thousands of jobs, just the immediate satisfaction of helping a little girl bring her imagination to life. Later, after Emma had been tucked into bed with promises that they'd continue the castle project tomorrow, Marcus and Sarah sat on his small couch sharing a bottle of wine that Sarah had brought over. It wasn't expensive wine. She'd carefully chosen something from the middle price range at the grocery store, but it felt more precious than the $1,000 bottles she usually drank at business. "Dinners, thank you," Marcus said softly, turning to face her on the couch. "For all of this. The way you are with Emma, the way you've become part of our lives, it means everything to me." Sarah felt her heart constrict. She'd never expected to feel this way about anyone, let alone a man whose entire yearly income was less than what she spent on clothes each month. But Marcus's honesty, his dedication to his daughter, his genuine goodness, it had completely transformed her understanding of what mattered in life. "She's an amazing kid," Sarah replied, "and you're an incredible father. I feel lucky that you've let me into your world." Marcus reached over and took her hand, the same gesture that had sent electricity through her that night in the park. "Sarah, I know we haven't been seeing each other very long, but I need to tell you something." Sarah's stomach dropped. Had he figured out who she really was? Had someone recognized her despite her careful disguise? "I'm falling in love with you," Marcus continued, his voice gentle but certain. "I know that might be too much too soon, but Emma adores you. and I can't imagine our lives without you in them anymore." Relief and guilt crashed over Sarah simultaneously. He loved her, or at least he loved the version of herself she'd presented to him. The woman who shopped at Target, who worried about money, who was impressed by dinner at a family-owned Italian restaurant. But what would he think of the real Sarah? The one who owned 3 homes, who had never worried about paying a bill in over a decade, who could buy his entire apartment building without thinking twice. "Marcus," she began, her voice catching slightly. "I care about you too. More than I expected to. More than I probably should." He leaned closer, cupping her face gently with his free hand. "Why shouldn't you? We're good together, Sarah. Really good." When he kissed her, Sarah felt like her carefully constructed world was both falling apart and coming together at the same time. This was what she'd been missing in all her previous relationships. This sense of partnership, of being valued for who she was rather than what she could provide. But even as she kissed him back, her phone was buzzing insistently in her purse. She tried to ignore it, but the buzzing continued. Finally, she reluctantly pulled away. "I'm so sorry. Let me just turn this off," she said, reaching for her phone. The screen showed 17 missed calls from her assistant Margaret, and a text message marked, "Urgent, emergency board meeting required." Sarah's blood ran cold. Emergency board meetings only happened for catastrophic events, major security breaches, hostile takeover attempts, or regulatory crises that could destroy the company overnight. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked, noticing her expression. There's an emergency at work," Sarah said, her mind racing. "I might need to step outside and make a quick call." "Of course, go ahead. I'll clean up the wine glasses." Sarah stepped out onto Marcus's small balcony and quickly called Margaret, who answered on the first ring. "Sarah, thank God. We have a major problem. Someone leaked the Germany acquisition plans to TechCrunch, and now the stock is in free fall. The board is demanding an emergency meeting tonight, and the German company is threatening to pull out of negotiations entirely. This could cost us billions." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her real life crashing back down on her.
"How bad is the stock drop?"
"Down 18% in after-hours trading. If this continues into tomorrow's opening, we could lose $40 billion in market cap." $40 billion. The number was so large it was almost abstract. But Sarah knew it represented thousands of jobs, millions of investors who trusted her leadership, and the future of a company she'd built from nothing. "Schedule the meeting for midnight," Sarah said quietly. "Get legal on the line with the German team, and prepare a press statement. I'll be there in an hour." "Sarah, are you okay? You sound strange." For a moment, Sarah almost laughed. Strange didn't begin to cover it. She was standing on the balcony of a man's modest apartment, wearing Target clothes, having just promised to help his daughter finish a cardboard castle, while simultaneously managing a crisis that involved more money than most countries' annual budgets. "I'm fine, Margaret. Just get everything ready." She hung up and stood there for a moment, staring out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, in trading rooms and corporate offices around the world, people were making decisions that would affect her company's future. Stock prices were falling, board members were panicking, and competitors were probably celebrating. And here she was, pretending to be someone else entirely. Sarah walked back into the apartment to find Marcus washing wine glasses in his small kitchen, humming softly to himself. The sight of him, so content and unaware of the corporate drama unfolding in her real world, made her heart ache. "I'm really sorry," she said, and the regret in her voice was completely genuine. "There's a crisis at work, and I need to go handle it. It could take most of the night." Marcus turned around, concern evident on his face. "Is everything all right? Do you need help with anything?" His immediate offer to help, even though there was nothing he could possibly do about a multi-billion-dollar corporate crisis, touched her more than any grand gesture ever had. This was who Marcus was, someone who instinctively wanted to support the people he cared about, regardless of circumstances. "It's just business stuff," Sarah said, the understatement of the century. "But thank you for offering. That means more than you know." Marcus walked her to the door, and they kissed goodbye with promises to see each other soon. As Sarah drove away in her Honda Civic, she caught a glimpse of Marcus in his apartment window, probably getting ready for his early shift at Danny's Diner. In 30 minutes, she'd be in her corner office wearing a $1,000 suit, making decisions that would affect global markets. But part of her would still be sitting on that living room floor, helping Emma build a cardboard castle and feeling more at peace than she'd ever felt in any boardroom. The distance between her two worlds was becoming impossible to navigate, and Sarah knew that soon she'd have to choose between them or find a way to bring them together without destroying everything she'd built with Marcus and Emma. As she parked her regular car in the executive garage and prepared to switch back into CEO mode, Sarah realized that the crisis at work might not be the biggest problem she was facing. The real crisis was in her heart, and there was no board meeting or press release that could solve it. The crisis meeting lasted until 4 in the morning. Sarah sat at the head of the polished conference table, fielding calls with German executives, reviewing legal documents, and making strategic decisions that would determine whether Chen Technologies survived the next few days. By dawn, they'd managed to contain the damage. The German deal was back on track. The stock had stabilized, and the leak had been traced to a disgruntled former employee who was now facing serious legal consequences. But as Sarah finally collapsed into her penthouse apartment, still wearing the expensive suit she'd changed into for the meeting, all she could think about was the cardboard castle sitting unfinished in Emma's bedroom. She had 3 hours to sleep before Marcus expected her to join them for Saturday morning pancakes, a tradition that had developed over the past few weeks. Sarah set her alarm and tried to rest, but her mind kept spinning between the corporate world she'd just saved and the simple life she'd been pretending to live. At 9:30, Sarah arrived at Marcus's apartment building in her Honda Civic, wearing jeans and a sweater, carrying a bag of fresh berries she'd picked up at the grocery store. She looked tired but tried to hide it behind a smile as Marcus opened the door. "You look exhausted," Marcus said immediately, concern evident in his voice. "Was the work thing really bad?" "Just a long night," Sarah replied, which was true enough. "But I'm here now, and that's what matters." Emma bounded into the living room, already dressed and excited. "Sarah, Daddy's making his special pancakes, and I set the table with the good plates." Sarah's heart melted, as she always did around Emma. The good plates were clearly just the regular dishes, but Emma had arranged them carefully with paper napkins and even found some wildflowers to put in a mason jar as a centerpiece. "It looks beautiful. Emma, you're such a good hostess." As they ate breakfast together, Sarah tried to focus on the moment: the taste of Marcus's surprisingly good pancakes, Emma's chatter about her upcoming school science fair, the morning sunlight streaming through the small kitchen window. But her phone kept buzzing with follow-up messages about the crisis, reminders of the world she was hiding from them. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" Emma said, syrup on her chin and curiosity in her eyes. "Of course, sweetheart." "Are you rich?" Sarah nearly choked on her orange juice. Marcus looked embarrassed and started to intervene. But Emma continued with the brutal honesty of children. "It's just that your clothes look really nice, and you always have perfect hair, and yesterday when we went to the store, you didn't check prices on anything. My friend Katie's mom is rich and she acts kinda like that too." Marcus's face flushed red. "Emma, that's not polite to ask about." But Sarah looked into Emma's innocent face and felt the weight of her deception crushing down on her. This child trusted her, loved her, and deserved better than lies. "Why do you ask, Emma?" Sarah said gently. "Because if you are rich, it's okay. I just want to know if you like us because we're fun, or if you're pretending to like us because you feel sorry for us." The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. In her elaborate deception, she'd never considered how it might look to a perceptive child. Emma had noticed the inconsistencies: the too perfect appearance, the lack of money concerns, the subtle signs that Sarah's life didn't quite match her modest claims. Marcus set down his fork, looking mortified. "Emma, Sarah is our friend because she cares about us, not because of money or anything else. And it's not okay to ask people about their private business." "I'm sorry," Emma said, looking genuinely contrite. "I didn't mean to be rude. I just really like you, Sarah, and I want to make sure you really like us too." Sarah felt tears threatening to spill over. She looked at this beautiful child, then at Marcus, who was clearly uncomfortable but trying to smooth over the situation, and realized that her careful deception was hurting the very people she'd grown to love most. "Emma," Sarah said softly, "can I tell you something important?" Both Emma and Marcus looked at her expectantly. "I do like you, both of you, more than I've ever liked anyone in my whole life, and that has nothing to do with money or anything else except that you're both wonderful, kind, amazing people." Emma beamed, satisfied with this answer, and returned to her pancakes. But Marcus was studying Sarah's face, and she could see questions forming in his eyes. After breakfast, Emma went to her room to work on a school project, leaving Sarah and Marcus alone in the kitchen doing dishes. The domestic routine felt natural and comfortable, but Sarah could sense Marcus's growing curiosity about Emma's questions. "I'm sorry about that," Marcus said, drying a plate. "She's at that age where she notices everything and doesn't have a filter about asking questions." "She's incredibly perceptive," Sarah replied carefully. "And she's not wrong to be curious about people's lives." Marcus paused in his drying, looking at her directly. "Sarah, can I ask you something? And please don't take this the wrong way." Sarah's heart began to race. "Of course. That first night we met, when you ordered coffee, you seemed worried about the cost. But since then, you never seemed to think about money at all. You bring wine, you offer to pay for things, you bought Emma that expensive art set last week without blinking. I'm not complaining. I'm grateful for your generosity, but I'm confused." Sarah set down the dish she was washing and turned to face him. The moment of truth was arriving faster than she'd expected, and she wasn't ready for it. Things have been better at work lately," she said weakly. "I got a raise." Marcus nodded, but she could see he wasn't entirely convinced. "That's great. You deserve it, working as hard as you do." They finished the dishes in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Sarah knew she was running out of time and believable explanations. Marcus was too intelligent and too caring not to eventually piece together that something didn't add up about her story. That afternoon, while Emma napped and Marcus worked on fixing a neighbor's leaky faucet for extra money, Sarah sat in his living room staring at her phone. She had 47 missed messages from work, 3 different crises that needed her attention, and a conference call with Tokyo that she was already late for. But she also had plans to help Emma finish the cardboard castle and cook dinner with Marcus. The two worlds were colliding in ways she couldn't manage much longer. Her phone rang and she saw Margaret's name on the screen. Against her better judgment, she answered, "Sarah, where are you? The Tokyo call started 20 minutes ago, and they're asking about the quarterly projections." "Can't someone else handle it?" Sarah asked quietly, glancing toward Emma's room where the little girl was sleeping peacefully. "Someone else? Sarah, you're the CEO. They need to hear from you personally about the expansion timeline, CEO." The word hung in the air like a confession. Sarah looked around Marcus's modest apartment, at the handmade curtains and second-hand furniture, at the photo of him and Emma at the beach that was clearly taken with an old phone camera. Then she looked at her own reflection in the dark television screen, seeing a woman who was living 2 completely different lives. "I'll call them back in 10 minutes, she said finally. As she hung up, Emma appeared in the living room doorway, rubbing her eyes and holding her stuffed dolphin. "Sarah, were you talking about being a CEO? Like the boss of a whole company?" Sarah's blood turned to ice. Emma had heard the conversation. This perceptive, intelligent child had just been handed the key to unraveling Sarah's entire deception. "Emma, Sarah began, but she couldn't find the words. Emma walked over and climbed onto the couch next to Sarah, cuddling up against her side with the trust and affection that made Sarah's heart break a little more each day. "It's okay if you're important at work," Emma said sleepily. "Daddy always says that good people can be important and still be nice. Are you a good person who happens to be important?" Looking down at this child who had somehow seen through her elaborate lies and still accepted her with pure, unconditional love, Sarah realized that the truth was no longer something she could avoid. Marcus and Emma deserved honesty, even if it meant risking everything they'd built together. "Yes, sweetheart," Sarah whispered, holding Emma close. "I'm trying to be a good person. And yes, I am important at work. More important than I told you and your daddy." Emma nodded against Sarah's shoulder, already half asleep again. "I thought so. You're smart like important people are. But you're also nice like regular people. That's why Daddy loves you." As Emma drifted back to sleep in her arms, Sarah knew that the time for pretending was over. Tonight she would have to tell Marcus the truth about who she really was, and hope that the love they'd built was strong enough to survive the revelation that she'd been lying to him from the very beginning.